flying airplanes makes you feel alive. It gives you a sense of freedom, of being liberated from your disability, with nothing to hold you back.
Amy Johnson is a very famous British aviatrix, and she once flew from the UK to Australia in only 15 days in a very light aeroplane back in the 1930s. And that was a very pioneering thing for a young woman aviator to do back then. Jenny Bodie has been appointed the very first female president since they were formed more than 100 years ago. She's deeply passionate about gender equality and science, technology, engineering and maths. And I'm on my way now to talk to her about what her year has been like as a president.
Scared, but thrilled. I wouldn't be president if it wasn't for Claire. By re-energising me to a certain extent, I suddenly found that I wasn't just retiring from Airbus, but I could actually retire from Airbus and have a breather and then kick into life this year as being president. I had resisted. I'd been asked and I'd said no, but then when I did say yes, and we had the council meeting and I went out of the room while everybody voted and then came back in, I was just over the moon. You know, you look downstairs and you see all the pictures of these sort of very august and famous people. I never thought I would join that group.
What do you think makes this society special since it was created?
For me, the most significant thing is that it's a very broad society. Only 50% engineering. I love to go to some of the branch things where, you know, there are a lot of guys who've been working in aviation aerospace for donkey's years and they're interested in the history. And I think that's something that we really do very well, that people can see that history is respected.
Who inspired you to go down the path of aerospace engineering?
I think you need to remember that it is just about the time of women's lib.
You know, they say a woman's place is in the home, and I suppose as long as she's in the home, she might as well be in the kitchen. Oh.
Not necessarily a very pleasant feel to it all, but there was just that, the door was just opening and it was very much being talked about women being liberated, i.e. able to do things. And I benefited from my teachers. I was taught by older women who were spinsters. You know, because of people that had died in the Second World War, there weren't quite so many husbands around, and they'd made careers of themselves coming on from the tail end of World War II. We were one of the first schools to do Nuffield physics, which was a completely new concept in the way that physics was taught. So they were real specialists and enthusiasts. But then coming on to talk about careers and what you might do, again, it was just the start of the time when people were thinking about girls becoming engineers. And there was the start of the women into science and engineering, those sorts, very embryo government initiatives. And it suddenly seemed that it might be possible.
The years 1950 to 1957 could be described as the post-war golden age of the British aircraft industry.
My dad was an engineer. He worked for the Bristol Aeroplane Company, which ultimately became part of Airbus. You know, he went off to Canada to do the cold weather trials on the Britannia, and it was all quite exciting stuff. So it seemed to me that it was something that I could do. So the engineering part sort of was influenced by a number of things that sort of blossomed out.
Did you feel that at the time your lecturers embraced you as one of the very few women students, or were they the older stereotypical thinking?
Some of them were of the old school. They were out to trip me up. It wasn't just the lecturers at Imperial, there were some of the people I'd been working at the British Aircraft Corporation. There were guys that wanted to trip you up because they really didn't approve and didn't agree. Some of them were so big-brained, they probably didn't even notice I was female. I don't actually like being the first necessarily, but I don't like being conventional, but not just being female in a job, but being me in the job, but just doing it differently. And I would say that's probably how I've taken my whole career.
I wanted to be a pilot when I was a teenage girl back in the 1970s. And I went to, the RAF wouldn't take pilots then, women. So I was at a rubbish comprehensive school and I applied to Cambridge a year early to read engineering, based on the fact that I thought that was the best degree, the best university. So that's what I did. I got my engineering degree from Cambridge. And in the last year of my degree, British Airways closed Hamble down. And so I was stuck then, because I had no money. Then started on countdown, then had children, and this is the kind of first time in my life that I've actually got the time and the money. We've got a little Diamond DA-40.
Do you remember what it was like to work on the iconic wing of the Concorde?
Yes, just. When I started at British Aircraft Corporation, we were still making Concordes, both at Filton and in Toulouse. I worked in the machine shop where vast billets of material were being machined to make the wing structure at a time when we didn't really think we were worrying about how much things cost or the economics or the sustainability of things, but it was a real pinnacle of fantastic engineering.
Did you ever get to fly in it?
No.
Do you regret that?
Yes, I do, yeah. We'll be going beyond it in some way. Mach 2 isn't fast enough. It was pretty good for getting across the Atlantic, but actually we want to get to the Far East. So I can imagine there's going to be something different.
They don't even acknowledge that you have a disability here, and I think that's really good. Like, it helps like your self-esteem as well. Like, they're not like, oh, you have a disability, are you sure you can fly?
Would you have ever thought that as a young woman you would become an aviator?
No.
What's good about making venues and festivals accessible is the fact that you'll just see everybody there. Everybody should be in the audience, and everyone should be on the stage, and everyone should have the right to work. And I think that's important, because if you really reflect the diversity of the community, then you're really making sure that every single person has the chance to take part.
So what do you think we can all do to make the world a more fairer and equal for everyone?
Forget what people look like. You know, whether they're male or female, black or white, abled or disabled, whatever, forget it, because it's absolutely and totally immaterial. It's about what goes on in people's heads that's important.
Like in films, you never have a woman pilot.
And how does that make you feel?
It doesn't really bother me that much, but I do kind of think it would be better if they were shown more.
So does that mean there are still some stereotypes that still exist in the aerospace world that you feel still need to be dispelled in terms of who should do it?
Yes. My little particular bête noire is the perception that men are pilots and women are cabin crew. Drives me spare. That sort of reinforcement is even worse now, in a way, when there is such a worship of celebrity and glamour. And I have to say, you know, to see the Virgin Atlantic adverts reinforces that totally negative stereotype of the girls wearing the high-heeled shoes and the lipstick, and you know, and the man is the, you know, heavy-jawed pilot who's going to save the world. And I find that outrageous.
You spearheaded an alliance of 15 companies along with the UK government agencies called the Next Generation Composite Wing.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that alliance, and why is that important for the research and technology sector?
Within the industry, and I think, I mean, not just Airbus, but Boeing as well, had recognised that we were almost getting aircraft structures as light as they could be using metal. And the lighter it is, the more fuel efficient it is, cheaper it is to operate, and also the more environmentally friendly it is. So for some time we had been realising that composite was potentially going to be the next step for us. We'd already been using composites, we being Airbus and Boeing, so we'd been using composites on some of the less significant structure, but we really had to look at making the next step where some of the primary, the real load-bearing and important structure was going to be composite as well. And we felt it was very important that in the UK we had to catch up quite quickly and urgently with capability to demonstrate, particularly within the Airbus partnership, that sort of capability existed in the UK. Because there was always the danger that investment both in Germany and in Spain in composites was suddenly going to look as though they had capability to manufacture lighter structures than we could in the UK. We're going to take this opportunity to start developing not only Airbus's capability but also the capability in the supply chain.
You're very passionate about, or it's very important for you to encourage particularly young women to follow in your footsteps. So why is that important?
I really believe in equal opportunity and equal access. If you take the business perspective, we're short of people. So it is stupid to cut out half of the population by saying to not support women becoming engineers. It's just downright stupid. And you can't have a team if you've only got a bit of the population in that team. You need the collection of people. Even more equally important, say for children and young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, because engineering is getting overwhelmed by sort of the middle class. And what about those kids from bad school, difficult schools? There's some awfully bright boys and girls that we're just not getting through because they just don't have that equal opportunity.
The world famous Chatham House rule may be invoked at meetings to encourage openness and sharing of information. So in what way does this society provide that neutral forum for aviation companies to get together, and what's important about being able to facilitate debate in a place where people and companies are willing to come together, for example, Boeing and Airbus?
Sometimes we have discussions and debates behind closed doors because we can be a neutral territory. Boeing's problem today is Airbus's problem tomorrow. Airbus's problems today, Boeing's problems tomorrow. And often the enemy, the threat, is not coming from the other company, it's coming from legislation, or it can be a technology problem, and often there are real benefits for the companies working together. I'm not suggesting that we'll ever see a time when they work on the same product, but companies are on the same side in certain situations. And that's not just Airbus and Boeing. I mean, it's the airlines. There will be times when it is appropriate for British Airways and Virgin to be in the same room, having the same debate. So being able to pick the subject and have the discussion about it is really important.
So what do you think is the role of this society now in the 21st century?
Clearly one of the most important things that underpins aviation and aerospace is safety. We can have the guys who are, designing computer games suddenly in here talking about how networks of PCs that play computer games can actually do computational fluid dynamics to design a new Airbus wing. So we can be very open, and we have to be open. So that for me is remembering where we've come from and making sure the relevant rules are still applied.
CFD is computational fluid dynamics, and to the industry what it means is that you're able to test things. We've accounted for maximum takeoff weight and our maximum engine weight, and within this airframe it can accommodate for all of those. I guess you would design an aircraft depending on what you would want it to do.
I had not, in the latter stages of my career, particularly been involved in women's network, this became a sort of second office for me in lots of ways, and I was being more aware of what was going on, and we were starting to look at how we could right some of the wrongs and introduce fairness and equality. And that's really when I got to know Claire, when she was launching the Women in Aviation and Aerospace Committee. Top of the list was that we disbanded because we'd done our job. And that is still top of the list, but we haven't quite got there yet. But we were quite clear on setting some targets for numbers of women as fellows, so in the higher grades, and also women onto the council and onto the Board of Trustees.
By organising events like this and taking us to these events, giving us more knowledge about the areas that we want to go into, and it's given us direction.
I didn't really know what it was before, so it does sound quite interesting, but I think it was just good to hear like what it was from coming from the people who actually do it instead of just reading it off a website or something.
You have 3 themes for your tenure. They are technology and learn outputs, science, technology, engineering and maths, so STEM, and diversity.
It's inevitable because of my background in being involved in R&T that I wanted to make sure that we maintained our technical activity, our technical role, our technical involvement. STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths, is all about prime the pump that's going to pull young people through into engineering and other careers in aerospace and aviation. When I'm talking to young people and to teachers, I'll say just let's have a look at the opening of the Olympics in 2012. Who were the 2 people who were most celebrated? It's Isambard Kingdom-Brunel and Tim Berners-Lee, and they happen to both be engineers. And I actually get some people who then say, oh, I didn't know they were engineers. You know, they thought they were businessmen or computer geeks. So there's a big education thing to be done.
Nearly every time I walk in this hangar, there's always something different. There's either a new aeroplane or a new project going on. Every day is different around here. One day you might be working on an aeroplane, one day you might be doing composite work. It simply changes every day, and it makes it very interesting, and it's a very interesting job actually. I don't even see it as a job. It's a shame that one day my placement will be up at this place.
What is the value of having a work placement, whether it's through academia or just through any opportunity?
I think it's invaluable. You may have no concept of the whole world of work. I think there is an issue about young people having to make decisions very early, and sometimes the decisions that they make, the subjects they're going to take at GCSE and A-level, and that can preclude them there and then from pursuing professional engineering, for instance, because they don't decide to do the full science syllabus. They do a combined science, which isn't good enough. But I think there's a problem right back to the very earliest stage, children in primary schools. You know, they're getting switched off by maths, don't necessarily understand it, and science is geeky.
Derek Spicer will be mine and Anam's mentor for the Live Your Dream Scholarship, and he is better known for being the 787 Dreamliner trainer.
For Boeing?
For Boeing, yes.
How can that help you to get to your first job as a British Airways commander?
I think the main thing is that he has a lot of experience in training pilots, in flying planes, in the aviation industry. So he'd be a good person to ask questions to or to go to for help.
We found it interesting with the Schools Build a Plane project that we've got here, that one of the things we have to tell the students that are involved, if you do something wrong, you must own up. And they don't want to because it's sort of built into them. Oh, you don't own up, nobody will find out, you'll be okay. Whereas in actual fact, if you've cross-threaded a nut or something, you have to own up because you might be flying in that aeroplane when that nut comes off. So they're little things. Some of the quite seem like quite superficial things, but they're actually really quite important. I shall continue doing this of how do we give school children more information about what they need to have at the end, so they make the right decisions at the right time. And how can we get better teaching of those subjects in schools? If they teach maths and physics 1 week a year, they get to spend in industry, and they forget about Ofsted and marking and stuff like that, and they actually come and see what industry is like. From a survival perspective, we've got to have more engineers. The teachers are really important influences in that.
You really want to catch the kids. You want to be going into primary schools, early secondary schools, if you really want people to look at it as a career.
Women have come from different ethnic backgrounds, they're disabled, they come from poor backgrounds, whatever. You know, gender diversity is the most significant one in this industry. So we've got all of these schools. So how many of those schools have people coming from industry into them to talk? So that would be a real easy tick in the box, wouldn't it, to say, right, every school must have a neighbourhood engineer, a STEM ambassador, or somebody coming in.
These women are in the news at home because they've undertaken a somewhat unusual war job.
We were founded by a group of women who, the majority of whom had flown in the ATA, and most of them had flown pre-war and were very experienced and accomplished pilots before ever they started flying, ferrying aircraft during the war. And they took it as a personal affront after the war when they were told, well, sort of patted on the head and said, thank you very much, you can now go home. And they were saying, but you've requisitioned our aircraft, you've sent us home, you're not letting us do what we did with complete freedom before, and it was a huge retrograde step, and we still haven't got back to where we were in the 20s and 30s.
They always say, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that. And they don't say, what can you do? I have a disability, okay? But I can do. So, you have a disability, but what are your capabilities? The doctor in Portugal, in the Aviation Institute, I said good morning, he said goodbye.
Why do you think those barriers to entry for disabled people exist in the flying aeroplane side?
It is ignorance, isn't it? Pure and simple, because people think you can't physically do it, which is really why they said women couldn't do it. There's all sorts of stupid things like that really are ignorance. The start of it is actually demonstrating that you can. If you look at an Airbus cockpit now, flying that joystick, the side stick, is very like the little joystick you have on electric wheelchairs. A lot of people can do that.
That's the hand control.
So that is left, yep, and that is right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. This is something I never ever thought I would do in my life. It's like it's dreams that schoolboys have, isn't it?
Yeah.
I fly a plane and look at it.
I think you have to demonstrate it. You just have to go ahead and do it and try and pull out the arguments about why not, and then you present back the arguments of why.
I'd love to get a pilot's license and fly, because that word freedom is just so precious, and this plane takes freedom to another level.
One day in the future, it shouldn't be a case that there are disability-specific organisations. That's what you would hope for.
Human beings like to belong to a gang, don't they? And whatever gang that might be, people who aren't in your gang are somebody else. You need champions for these things, and you mentioned about disabled people, and particularly the guys coming back, from military conflict and whatever. I think it's really made a difference, because it's suddenly just that bit more acceptable, that people aren't quite so embarrassed about it.
What do you do for fun?
Cook, garden, fish, birdwatch, walk, eat and drink. Try to get some sleep.